was doing some research at the library yesterday, going through the Nugget archives, and in 1968, in March, they were talking about the economic collapse and inflation of 4.5%, and the editorials were about housing affordability.
Yes.
1968.
Yeah.
So what can we do in this day and age to help people afford to live and find housing?
Yeah. It's interesting that you went back in time, because I hear a lot about inflation, and I hear a lot about how people want things to go back to the way they used to be, right? And inflation is one of those words that just triggers people tremendously without a lot of context. I find there's, it's a very surface, puddle deep analysis of inflation. And I think one thing that I'm trying hard to help people understand is that this is no accident. Like, what we're seeing today is no accident at all. This is my whole entire life for certain. I remember where we've been slowly chipping away at the foundations of everything that makes our communities and individuals like healthy, safe, and well, right? So it's going to be very challenging, but not impossible, to turn this ship around. But you go back in time, and even before the 60s, you can see like the Tommy Douglas era, where there was a massive injection of money into social services, like incredible injection into that, into housing, into healthcare, into just about everything. And so we've been riding that wave from that time and not really investing in it much after that, right? So we're seeing an inability for people to afford housing. We're seeing an inability of people now to be able to afford food in their mouths. And a lot of it all just boils down to the fact that we've let it happen. We've let exploitation happen. We've let people starve. We've decided that, to believe in the bootstrap theory, that if you just work hard enough, all the good will come to you, instead of analyzing the systems around at play and how the structures are really designed to work for some people and keep a lot of people out. So I know that's a big answer, but it's just fascinating that you bring up that time, because that's the time when we really push to make things well for people. And that's the time that people refer to often. But what people forget, especially conservative or right-leaning politicians, when they talk about inflation or the way things used to be, that's a time when we really pushed into social well-being, right? That's when we really invested into social services.
Yeah. The time people like to harken back to is actually a time where things began to rot, and there needed to be a social answer.
Yes.
So what would be some of the answers at this time?
This time around?
Yeah, what can we do?
Yes, well, you're asking big questions. Like, to address housing, or just address affordability in general?
Well, the capitalist corporations are profiting in record ways, and people are having a hard time. So how can we address some of that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that every single time I speak with people about addressing affordability, one thing I notice is that there's people think that there's like a scarce amount of resources, right? That there's, if we address housing or if we address healthcare, then we're like, there's not enough to go around. But really what needs to happen, there needs to be a change in priorities, right? So instead of handing out all of these tax breaks and subsidies to large for-profit corporations, instead of rolling out the red carpet for the Walmart and Westons of the world, what we really need to do is make sure that they're paying their fair share and then investing that back into the public so that we can all do well. Because right now, no one is going to do well, and the people who are making the most amount of money are making it off the backs of the people who are doing the most amount of work with the least amount of money. And that is really heartbreaking for me to see, and I see it every single day. I was speaking with a woman who worked at Dollarama almost her whole life, and she was telling me some of the stories and the increase of what she's hearing when she's at the cash, and just talking about how some people are like buying the packs of Mr. Noodles, and they're like, this needs to last me like a week and a half. They're like, and at some point, something's got to give, right? Like, people aren't healthy when they don't have access to good, healthy food. And I certainly don't expect people to line up at a food bank for it, right? We need to give people some autonomy over their lives. And there's lots to it, but
I wonder if there can be some type of information campaign that gets down to the specifics of how much corporations don't pay in taxes.
Yes.
And how much they get in subsidy, because it gets lost in all the white noise of politics and whatnot. But I think if people actually, some of them think that the corporations pay their fair share.
Absolutely do not. Yes.
Yeah. So I wonder, is there any efforts to better inform with actual data and information about what they're paying and what they're not?
Well, I have some stuff I can share with you.
I was hoping you did.
But I do. I have this really interesting graph of showing from around 1950 to current,
Right.
the corporate tax.
Yeah, I've seen something like that.
I might have shown you, I can't remember, but it just keeps going down, 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 down.
Yeah.
But then the next graph shows the personal tax
Yeah.
increase,
Yeah.
right? And it goes up, 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 up. So we've completely flipped it around. So, that's why people can't compute, when you say we're going to invest in healthcare, they think it's going to hit them, right? But really, the NDP, like our position, my position certainly, is to address that gap. And like the corporations don't move away when you think Walmart's going to pick up and leave?
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely not, right? But it's a glaring gap. It's a glaring gap, and it's egregious. Like it's immoral.
Well, we've made corporations as powerful and have as much rights as people somehow, and they're created solely on profit, and they, by law, the board members need to continue to be greedy, basically, if you want to define it any other way. But the corporate stock investment type companies, they can't do anything but eat. Right? So it's a strange thing. Even somebody that's of a normal, reasonable, good heart on a board can't vote against something that means less profit.
100%.
Right? That's why we're stretched out all over the globe with our supply problems here, because they were forced basically by their own creation to be greedy. I wonder if there's anything, I guess, well, that's just the capitalist system, right?
Yeah, and there's no effort for them, at least currently, either by either liberals or conservatives to stop it. Like, it's in their best interest to keep it going, right? Because when you're super connected to those lobbyists and insiders, you said it, they really are, they have such a weight in the decision making in government. And I think everyone should be examining that a little bit closer and how that impacts just even walking downtown North Bay, right? Like, it's right there.
Yeah.
So that's, I think that's what I was talking to you before the cameras rolled about, how people are starting to make those connections. A good example is a few restaurants downtown here. They're like, Erika, I know that the more we keep pushing people into poverty, the less people are going to come downtown to my business. The less people are going to come and sit on my patio. Like, the connections are being made, right? The Venn diagram overlaps in certain spots, right? So when we take care of each other, it's a massive benefit. Like, our streets are safer, there's less crime, there's less healthcare issues. Like, this is not a radical idea to take care of each other and to ensure that the people making billions of dollars of net profits going to like a handful of shareholders while literally starving people on the ground. What's more insidious, if you will, is you even look into the PR efforts of a lot of these companies. Like, you look into Walmart, like, they've injected themselves into food bank boards, right? And when meanwhile they refuse to raise the wages of their workers, and it's their workers who are using food banks, right? But leaning on that kind of corporate charity, social responsibility, if you will, and how that also benefits their image when, like, they're just running off with millions of dollars. It's alarming. It's alarming and dark when you start thinking about it.
Well, I realize that, well, I've written about it before, and it's trying to find that place where people that are just getting by and saving a little bit for retirement, and they're working very hard for it. They're very sensitive. They don't want the people below them getting anything for free when they have to work hard just to survive themselves. And I think as much as that psychology is hard, we have to get over that somehow. And I think your answer would be, if we had the corporations paying their fair share, we wouldn't have to worry about that as much. Is that true?
That for sure. But it's an uphill battle, not only with that, but just individualism, right? That's something that when you examine my 41 years on this earth, individualism has been the narrative, right? Like, if you just work hard, if you just do this, then all of this will play out for you. And we're seeing now that's not actually happening. It's a big, great lie. It's a very big lie. And so what's happening are people are still holding tight to that narrative because that's the truth that they've always known, right? It's a sink or swim, or why can't you just, I call it, why can't you just go to work? Why can't you just get better? Why can't you just insert whatever else, right? But that why can't you just mentality, instead of, looking around and, as I said earlier, understanding that how interconnected we are, because we are.
But we don't want people to not have to do anything to survive either, right?
What do you mean by that?
Well,
like, you
we
want
don't.
people to work.
We want people to have a meaning in their life and something that motivates them to do stuff.
Yeah.
Because I think my instinct tells me that you would just spoil a person by giving them everything they want. I wouldn't do it to my own kid even, right?
Yeah.
So at what level does an individual have to at least do something for themselves?
For sure. Yeah, I think for sure. My first thought when you asked me that question is, like, do I think that people, should have work and meaning in their life? Absolutely, right? Like, I'm not here to sit here and say that I don't think anyone should work.
Yeah.
But that narrative starts to get troublesome even when I saw Ford recently talk about, the way we're going to help people on ODSP is just give them jobs, right? We start to really individualize illness and ailment to the point where we're not even understanding that. Like, okay, I'm going to give you an example. There's two examples I have. Long-term care is a good one, and also people with disabilities, right? So we've gone to the point where we've devalued people based on their inability to work, right? So you see that in long-term care where people are like, oh, well, they're done, they've had their working capital time, right? Like, I've heard it, like it's their time, it's fine if they go. It's fine if we leave them behind in this pandemic, right? Same with people living with disabilities. They're not working, so they're not valued as much. So I think there's somewhere in between what you and I are talking about do I think that there needs to be more meaningful employment for people where they can, not put together 3 and 4 jobs just to put food on the table, jobs that provide benefits and that don't kill people in the process. That's what I'm here for. Is that kind of community where we don't run people over for the sake of, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something like that would come after we get the richest participating as they should in the social contract, right?
And they're not going to do it willingly, right?
No.
Because they're benefiting off of that whole structure of,
Yeah.
They're grossly benefiting off of it.
One of the things that drives a lot of people, and I would say a lot of boomers who came up through this system with the idea that they need to provide for themselves in retirement. So
Yes.
their investments, their jobs they kept because of pensions and benefits, and everything was designed because they wanted to retire and have the golden years.
Yes.
And turns out it's never enough. So they're never wanting to make any decisions that reduce their ability to save and do profit off their investments.
Yes.
So they're keeping. I believe there's a lot of people that keep too close an eye on gathering all the eggs for later, right? And it's just part of our system. But it's a greedy sort of squirreled away everything for yourself because you think you might need it. The way things are going, you never know how much is enough. People are, doing cartwheels because their housing investments are bubbled up to where they're making 40 to 50% more than they thought on a sale. But they don't realize how that hurts the other generations until their kids are trying to put houses together, right? So.
You think about, my parents are boomers, and you think about, and you talk to them about growing up, right?
Yeah.
And I kind of try to understand what it was like. And their parents were parents from the Great Depression.
Mm-hmm.
Like their parents had to hoard. They were putting things away and scrimping and saving. Like you talk to any boomer, and that's often their experience is the Great Depression. That's their parents. So you can see how that mentality has come to be, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I can see my dad doing it now, like love him to pieces, but he does the same thing. But going back to that great lie I call, right? The great lie. I'm going to quote that.
I like it. The great lie.
The great lie that, many people were told. And I think that's why there's a division between boomers and other generations, because they're like, why can't you just, right? Why can't you just save your money? Why can't you just work and go to school at the same time and pay your tuition? Like, it's actually, you can't do that. You could do it then because the wages matched inflation.
Yeah.
But now they absolutely don't. It's impossible. It's no one can work even 80 hours and make ends meet at this point. But you think about boomers are still in positions of a lot of power, right? They've got the social capital, they've got the financial capital, they've got the physical capital, and they've got the political capital. They still are operating a lot of the decision making, and changing that will, changing some of those structures, it is a direct threat to the way of life that they've built, right? That they've really built. And but housing is really problematic because we've never stopped it. We've never stopped or put in barriers in place for people to obtain housing, for us to have more housing. I mean, you follow the news, like even here locally, when people lose their minds when we're going to put up more affordable housing, right? Like I see it all the time municipally too. It's the barriers we put in place for people. They're amazing. They blow my mind. They blow my mind. And then, I don't know if you've spoken to anybody who's either tried to obtain housing or is renting right now, but when I'm at the doors with people, like there's people who've been rent evicted. They get a slap of paint goes up, and then the apartment goes up for $1,000 more the next month. And talk to the realtors here. It's numbered companies from Toronto buying up a lot of these houses here in North Bay, and it's like pushing out our own community members. Like, at what point is this a good thing? And so when I hear community members, prominent community members say like, oh, there's so much growth in North Bay, I'm like, for who? For who? Because you see, like, blatantly, you just go knock on the doors with some people, and like, to me as a politician, even though I have a hard time identifying as one, but I view my position as pulling people in, not pushing people out. That's basically why I'm here, is how can we make sure we're bringing people back from the outside of the margins of society? We're not pushing them out. When I speak to conservative voters, what they're seeing is a selling out of, a selling out is probably a really good way of putting it. That we've seen local representation have the interests of all that we've said earlier in this meeting about corporate interests and insiders, while leaving people behind and then coming in right before an election and then throwing money like anywhere that it sticks. But they're not stupid. They're looking back at the past 4 years and they're like, well, why didn't you do anything here, or here? Why didn't you do anything when you had the most amount of power as the finance minister, albeit the shortest tenured one? But you, all this power, right? All this power to do things right by people. And yes, are some of their interests a little bit different than mine? But again, the Venn diagram overlaps, right? Like you can saw very clearly that play out, you know, a year and a half ago when our main street was shut down and Walmart was wide open and no caps, right? Cars pushed right to the brink. The whole parking lot was full. And, you know, and then you have regular people who are living and working downtown laying off their workers and shutting their doors. Like it's selling out, right? You're selling out your community for the interests of other people. And, you know, you talk to old school conservatives and they get it. They do.
I think part of that is that people are recognizing bald-faced politics for what it is and short-term thinking.
Yes.
So even a capitalist would normally have a long-term view, a conservative long-term view. So when you're not looking long-term and you're doing what you're saying is decisions based on what's politically expedient and politically something you can capitalize on, I think people are actually seeing that.
No, you make a good point. I often talk about bandaid solutions in downstream and upstream. I talk about that a lot. But it's far sexier to give money at the bottom and look like the hero than it ever will be to go upstream and start investing in, you know, childcare and start investing in education and start investing in mental health and addictions and start, you know, breaking down these barriers, because that's where the issue is. That's where the hole is, right? So I want to go up there and plug that hole so that we stop going down here. And then issues are so complex that they're nearly impossible to pull apart. They're challenging both as individuals and as communities. Do I think that's impossible? Absolutely not. But we've created this, right? And so, you know, whenever I see these announcements in the paper, they're disingenuous. Like they're for power. They are straight up for power, Dave. Like it's, and people see through that. They do, and they want meaningful solutions, and that's really what I want to do. That's what I'm here for.
A couple of the most recent local announcements, as far as funding goes, involved Canada or College and its village and long-term care, which is interesting, and also the addictions and mental health clinic that apparently is going to be operating down the Lakeshore. Surprise to many in town when that was announced. It's an example of what you're talking about?
It's in part an example. I think that a lot of the announcements lack substance and planning. A lot of these announcements were not consulted with stakeholders. They were just thrown together and kind of forced to happen. And you can, like, no one, for example, at Canadore, I know this, was consulted about that treatment center. And I will say, full disclaimer, like, my partner works in addictions and mental health. But no, it's not just about him. Like, no one was consulted about this. And what gets even trickier is, like, you start to follow the money of, like, so that's where we're putting it?
Interesting.
You know?
Yeah.
Interesting. Like, oh, and whose problem was that? Oh, okay. That they didn't want to, they couldn't get rid of? So did we just solve someone else's problem here? Like, is there not other solutions that we could have put forward? It starts to just be really, like, really challenging. But it is, from what I understand from, is that there's just these announcements just don't have substance. They don't have planning. They are announcements.
Yeah.
They're announcements.
And I think, if anything, the pandemic and people's long hours spent online, as much as some have been pulled into rabbit holes and disinformation, it actually gave people a clear view of manipulation at work. Like, it's been talked about a lot. Disinformation. Like, I received a flyer in the mail the other day that I was talking about education funding. And I saw a couple teachers.
So bad.
I saw a couple teachers pull that apart so
Yes,
easily,
so
as far,
easily.
and it was just bald-faced sort of manipulation of data.
Yeah.
And But it seems still to work.
Well, I have to remind myself that not everyone's plugged into the day-to-day of politics like I am.
Yeah.
And that's not an insult. That's just because people are busy and, I'm paying close attention to it. But, I do find it as manipulation. It's manipulation of the public. It's insulting to the public. It's their half-truths and, again, for power's sake, not for the betterment of others. But, misinformation, you can see they're playing into it. Like it's a benefit. As I talked about my phone call in with my father this morning, he's like, they like it. Like the right likes misinformation because they'll just dabble in it enough, right? To bring in that emotional charge so that you stick with them. Like they play with that fire. It's a benefit to them. It actually benefits. And
yeah, they stoke their base for donations. 100%. There was a good federal example the other day with the Alberta and Jason Kenney on the tax on trucks that doesn't exist.
Doesn't even exist. And so, what do you expect from a government that's like literally making stuff up as they go? And, they don't ever have a plan. They're just manipulating people over and over and over again to go back to making sure that they're in positions of power, not to benefit other people, but to benefit themselves. Like when we win, like my opponent's going to land on his feet in 2 seconds. Like it's a benefit for them to be in these positions because they just springboard into, private interests right after that. They just manipulate government so that it benefits the people that are their friends and insiders. It's dark. And you can see, talk about misinformation, like you can see how people got to some of these conclusions, right? Even though that you talk to them and you're trying to figure out what they're saying, and some of it seems like so far-fetched and they've gone down the rabbit hole, but in all that there's kernels of truth, right? And it's making sure that you find those kernels of truth to talk to people, because is there shady stuff? Absolutely. Are they exploiting people? Absolutely. Are they using government for their own interests? Absolutely. Is the dial like way over here? It's getting close, but you can see how people have slid down that rabbit hole, and now it's challenging. It's challenging to kind of pick apart.
Well, the big bugaboo for the NDP in Ontario, of course, is the Bob Rae days, and I imagine that's difficult to actually having the stomach all the time, because I myself at the time was arguing with my friends and relatives who were in unions, work in public service, who were ready to eat Bob Rae from top to bottom, just for what he proposed in dealing with the financial situation was actually the best possible situation, and they got rewarded with their inability to see long-term with Mike Harris and the Common Sense Revolution. But it haunts the NDP.
Yes and no. It does by some people who are a little bit, who are clearly a bit older than me.
Yeah.
I have to remind people, when people talk to me about Bob Rae, I just go, and Mike Harris. Bob Rae, for all intents and purposes, also was a liberal. He crossed the floor and went to the Liberals too, right? So do I think that he was in a challenging situation? Absolutely. Do I think that this really overshadows us in ways that maybe you might think it doesn't? I only hear it once in a while.
Right.
And but what's a much deeper legacy is for sure Mike Harris, right? Those are the legacies. So whenever conservative says Bob Rae to me, I usually just say Mike Harris back.
Right. Well, that's a good answer for sure, because there's a lot that we're still dealing with from the so-called common sense revolution.
Yeah, and you can see that narrative play out today. I mean, a good example, I was just talking about Mike Harris the other day, but when I brought my friend Saul Mamakwa up to visit,
right.
He's a MPP from Quaitanock,
mm-hmm.
and I brought him to the university, and it was I drove him up, and he's like, you named your library after Mike Harris?
Yeah.
What is this place?
Yeah. Where have you brought me?
Yeah, where have you brought me?
Yeah.
But yeah, there's that's a lot of damage. So that was an incredible amount of damage. It was the first actually time that I experienced like a protest. I was in high school.
No kidding.
Was that Harris days and the teachers going on the line for that.